Welcome back. Today we are going to do a quick chat on Topping's new DX5 II. So first I want to thank Apos Audio for letting me borrow this one. This one is kind of very new, sent to me straight from Topping. So very much thankful that I had a chance to actually hear it. And more thankful because I'm actually an old-time kind of DX5 owner. I've had it for a few years. Very much a fan of the original DX5, so to get my hands on the new DX5 was kind of exciting for me. So here it is, and again, I will say as the original owner of the DX5, this whole new design with the new display, it's kind of makes me quite jealous, quite envious. This is very, very nice. It's also has a 4.4 on the front, and that would be a huge bonus on the original. But I kind of quickly wanted to actually explain why this one was here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Topping, one of the advantages of it, they do have an XLR in the front, and whether you have a Topping or something else, if you do have an XLR in the front, do buy at least one IM cable that has an XLR plug. You can plug this one in. One of the advantages of having Toppings is you can run all these outputs at the same time. So if you're into A/Bing sets, you can plug one into your XLR, one into your 4.4. You can basically hear them simultaneously by switching back and forth. It's actually a huge bonus. My L70, my Topping L70 kind of runs everything all at the same time as well. It's really, really nice to be able to either plug straight into the XLR with a cable or use an adapter. You're going to do a XLR at 4.4. Huge bonus. Really, really nice to have an XLR on the front. I like it for that. Including the 4.4 on the front on DX5. Two, huge bonus and, very much needed. And this one is a fully balanced version of the DX5, whereas the original was not. So some of the things that changed on the DX5 II, this one is now dual ES9039Q2Ms. The old DX5 was actually a quite older ESS model. I think it was an AS something. This one is now fully balanced. It's using their new X hybrid architecture. Their amplifier has actually been kind of replaced. They replaced the NFCA modules, which the original DX5 used. They have something now new that's called the X Hybrid amplifier. They do have this new Aurora UI, which is on this new, I think, 2-inch display. They do now have the 4.4, as I said, and there's also a PEQ system that kind of runs, you can run that on your PC. You can kind of switch through the settings on the display itself, but to actually use the PEQ, you do need to plug it into something like a PC. This one does retail for about $299, which is slightly cheaper than the original DX5. I think there's also a bump in the power. This one does about 66.4 watts on 32 ohms. I think that's a little bit higher than the original, or probably quite a bit higher than the original. I don't remember what the original one was. I typically run IM, so 6,400 milliwatts is kind of way up there for IMs alone. But for headphones, you'll kind of take advantage of that little extra power boost on the newer one. And the DX5 II also supports Bluetooth 5.1, LDAC, aptX HD, aptX Adaptive, AAC, SBC, all the things that you would actually appreciate over Bluetooth. And this one is actually connected to my phone over Bluetooth, so you're actually seeing the VU meter actually change. You can switch the VU meter to other things by hitting the, let me get back to the return. Let me get back to display. Let me get back. Oh, didn't want to do that. But the other display that you can do is, I think, that one, which is actually a little bit more useful than the VU meter, which this is the one I typically use. So yeah, very, very nice display of what's happening in your music. I think that's really cool. Again, I wish my DX5 had something cool. The original DX5 has like a tiny display with some text on it. Definitely not as beautiful as that one. So again, I'll say that my bias on this particular DX5 or DX5 II, not everyone likes Topping's flatter, more neutral sound, but I prefer their transparency. There's always very little coloring on their amps. And I think for reviewing, I like to review the tuning of the IEM in particular. I don't really want the amp coloring too much of that. I think a lot of reviews on people try to review sets on warmer amps. You're sort of getting part a review of the IEM itself, part a review of what the amp is coloring that sound to be, and I prefer my amp to be very transparent, and I like Topping sound for that reason. And DX5 is sort of right along the lines with that as well. And again, I'll say the other biases. I've owned the DX5 for years. I like it very much. It's a great all-in-one unit that came out, more than a few years ago. So sound impressions on DX5 II. Does it sound like a topping? I'll say kind of right away, yes, it does sound like a topping. That is no big surprise. Does it sound like a better DX5? And I'll say no, it's not quite a better DX5. And again, remember my bias. I've been using a DX5 for many, many years. I am heavily biased towards the sound on the DX5, and I'll say this one isn't quite the DX5. And part of it is, I don't necessarily think it's the DAC change, but I do think it's their architecture change of using X hybrid and replacing the NFC modules. I think that did actually give you a slightly changed sound on the DX5 too. And I think one of the characteristics of the original DX5 is there's quite a bit of upper treble extension. It can sound quite airy. It's very good at reproducing the sound of the room. If you're really into hearing those slight moments of reverberation or echoes or those things that make you feel like you're in the room with a performance artist, those things came across very, very well on the DX5. Harder to hear on the DX5 too, and I think that gave the DX5 a more spacious sound. When you get into comparing, and if you're an IEM guy and you're really into comparing resolve and nuance and textures, every little bit counts, and those just come across a little bit better on the DX5. But on the DX5 too, I do think the lower price is spot on. This has more of a consumer-friendly sound, a little bit better on pricing. Where DX5 extends out into the upper treble, DX5 too has a slight emphasis in the upper mids. And again, if you kind of take away a little bit from the upper treble, you tend to be a little bit more focused on the vocals, and that is a very consumer-friendly style sound. That's exactly what they did here. So it's not like they put a big bump by the upper mids to make them come forward or sound, a little bit kind of more in your face. It's just taking a little bit away from the upper end just gives you a little bit more of a focus on the vocals and clean vocals. And again, that is going to come across to a lot of people very much an improvement. And it just has the slight emphasis there. It's a cleaner sound. You don't have the extra extension. Coming from a CS-based dongle, if you're familiar with those style dongles, this will be very, very familiar. It has that style sound. It's a really nice upgrade path to a desktop with much more power if you're very familiar with that style sound. And again, I'll say that when you kind of push the upper end in a little bit, the balance of DX5 too is just slightly different. Where DX5 is more linear, it kind of goes from sub-bass all the way through kind of a higher treble extension. It allows a lot of separation. There can be vocals with impactful texture bass. DX5 kind of pushes the vocals slightly forward, a little bit more of an emphasis there, and it makes it a little bit slightly harder to hear everything else around it. But most people just want to hear clear vocals, and that makes sense in this general sense, right? I think that change makes sense. Lower price, this one is kind of more of a consumer thing and perhaps not as much of a audiophile style tuning, but you can kind of get there if you have PEQ. And I wouldn't say DX5 too is actually warmer. It's just there's a little less upper treble extension. That will sound a little bit slightly softer. It's subtly different with a more intimate stage as well. Again, all these things sort of move you into a more familiar consumer style tuning as opposed to audiophile tunings, which you want this huge amount of extension on both sides and all the clarity and all the things that Topping are known for. This is going to be slightly different, but I wouldn't say that they necessarily changed. I wouldn't say that they changed the bass or the mids or treble in a radically different, more colored or any sense away from the Topping sound. But it's almost like having two people follow the recipe with the same ingredients. It's going to come out slightly different, and those two people can disagree on which one is better. And that's exactly what happens on DX5 and DX5 too. It's like you have a lot of the same components from both. They're kind of mostly the same, and then there's just a little bit that is slightly different between the two. And again, I'll kind of point to the X hybrid architecture. I think that is just slightly different on the upper end. How that comes across on the bass, again, that is kind of slightly different as well. Some people are going to prefer one. Some people are going to prefer the other one. Again, my bias is something that I've been using for years. I actually liked the DX5 sound. I think that was fine. This one sounds just a little bit different to me, kind of more resembling a consumer-friendly, maybe a CS dongle style sound. And again, a lot of people are going to prefer that. So would I recommend the DX5 too? Yeah, I can certainly nitpick the sound and say, well, it's not as nice as the box that's been on my desk for so many years, but I think you do have to acknowledge that I wish it had all of the new features. I wish it had this display. I wish it had the 4.4 output. I wish it had PEQ. And as your first all-in-one or your first topping, go for the features over the small difference in sound, right? I can nitpick it, but really, if you're just buying your first one, go buy the newer one with the nicer features. So what would I do if the DX5 II wasn't loaned to me and this was going to be my personal unit? I would wait for it to go on sale at Apos. They happen to have a sale right now. This one isn't on sale, but in the future, they're probably going to have another sale, and this one is probably going to go on sale. And if I bought it, I would use the PEQ to dial in. I thought the presets were actually pretty good. Ironically, a couple of things that I pointed out, the airiness of it isn't quite the same as DX5. The bass response, when you hear everything in balance and at the same time, isn't quite the same. So they happen to have presets. There's a bass preset. I think there's 2 bass presets. There's an airy preset. It's like almost like they kind of thought of the things that people were going to nitpick it and said, well, we'll just give you really reasonable presets to kind of move it closer to what we did in the past. And I think that's what they did on DX5 too. And if this was my unit, I would just simply poke at it in PEQ over time and build it up and dial it into a sound that I really, really like, because all the other features kind of make it a better choice over the original one. You just have to dial it into your own listening preferences. So that is what I got on Topping's new DX5 II. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.